Clashes erupted between demonstrators and police. At least 26 officers injured as bottles and flares flew.
London has erupted. Main roads around the centre of the city are blocked. Police in full public order gear are on the streets and crowds are chanting about mass immigration and a government that they say has lost control. This is not a think tank debate. It is a real-time backlash against years of high migration, overflowing hotels and services people feel are breaking. One decision was all it took to light the fuse. The question now is simple. Is this a one-off spasm of anger or the moment the whole United Kingdom shifts into a new, far more dangerous phase? Let us start exactly where it blew.
The far-right rally descended into violence when a faction of Robinson's supporters threw items at the rival demonstration and tried to break through police barriers set up to separate the groups.
How one decision lit the fuse? By early evening, people had already had enough. New government guidance widened a so-called humanitarian route, making it easier for people who arrived illegally to stay in the country while their claims dragged on. At almost the same time, a court ruling made deportations to certain countries practically impossible. On the ground, this did not feel like legal detail. It felt like proof that once you are in, you stay. In one neighbourhood, a long-term asylum hotel suddenly emptied. Within days, the same faces were spotted in rental flats up and down nearby streets. Residents were not asked. They were not told. They were simply expected to cope with more pressure on housing, on doctors, on schools. Then news of a violent attack started to spread, linked in online chats to a recent arrival. The facts were unclear, but the anger was not. For people who had watched migration numbers climb while their own lives got harder, this was the final straw.
There are people coming into this country at an alarming rate, and they are causing and creating a massive problem in this country. They are, some of the most heinous crimes. They're sexually assaulting women and children in our communities. There are people that are murdering people. Just the knife attacks the other day on the train. It's unacceptable. It's got to stop.
A small protest plan became a mass march into central London. Within hours, thousands were outside Parliament and on key roads, demanding that someone finally put British citizens first. The moment, London lost its balance. At first, it was a furious but controlled standoff. Protesters pushed against metal barriers, holding signs about broken promises and mass immigration. Police held a solid line, trying to keep tempers just below boiling point. Then one object flew. Some said it was a bottle, others a firework. It landed close to the officers and instantly changed the mood. More objects followed. The crowd surged. An officer stumbled. A protester went down. Parents grabbed children. Older residents tried to escape side streets and found them already blocked. Within minutes, uniforms in standard kit were replaced by helmets and shields. More vans arrived, helicopters took up position overhead. A city that had been tense moved on to high alert. What began as a march against mass immigration turned into a night of open confrontation, and every other town in the United Kingdom watched and asked the same thing. If this is what happens in London now, what happens here next?
The protest started in the streets south of the River Thames before heading towards Westminster. Organisers dubbed the Unite the Kingdom March as a celebration of free speech.
Once the first clash hit social media, the rest of the city reacted at speed. Short clips, filmed from shaky hands, spread far beyond the original street. A brief pushing match became a riot in some captions, a crackdown in others. People who had been sitting at home, watching the coverage unfold, felt pulled towards the centre of events. Gatherings began in other parts of London, some organised, some spontaneous. In one area, hundreds of people marched toward a government building, chanting about borders and national identity. In another, smaller groupings formed outside hotels, known to be housing asylum seekers, though they were quickly kept at a distance by police. The sense of pressure did not stay in one chosen square. It seeped into multiple postcodes at once. Public transport started to feel the strain. Buses were diverted away from streets now crowded with people. Some underground stations closed exits, citing safety concerns. U-turns. That in turn forced even more people onto the already packed pavements. The city's arteries were clogging. Drivers sat in traffic, watching events roll past their windscreens, listening to reports on the radio that struggled to keep up. The atmosphere was strange and layered. In some spots, the mood was almost carnivalesque, with people singing and waving flags. In others, only a few streets away, the mood was sharp and brittle, with shouting, pushing, and the distant crack of something that might have been fireworks and might have been something worse. London was no longer a single, coherent scene. It was a collection of flashpoints, each feeding the next through the screen in everyone's hands.
You should be here standing with us!
Police and high alert. The response from the Metropolitan Police Service escalated in stages. At first, the approach was to contain and guide, using lines of regular officers to keep routes open and prevent opposing groups from colliding. As the night wore on and incidents multiplied, the posture hardened. Public order units in protective equipment moved into place. Officers formed tighter lines, shields locked. Helicopters circled above, their searchlights sweeping across roads and squares, illuminating small dramas that would otherwise have gone unseen. From certain vantage points, it looked like a city under siege. From within the police control room, it looked like a complicated and shifting puzzle with multiple potential flashpoints needing attention at once. Calls were made to neighbouring forces to send additional officers. Hospitals were warned to prepare for possible casualties. Fire services were told to expect calls about bins and vehicles set alight. On the ground, the line between reassurance and intimidation is thin. Some people felt safer seeing officers in numbers, believing they would prevent serious violence. Others saw the same presence as a provocation, a sign that the state was more interested in control than listening. A few individuals, already primed for confrontation, tried to break through lines or goad officers into reacting. Most officers did what they are trained to do, hold, deflect, and slowly push a crowd away from sensitive sites. But even the most disciplined response cannot fully remove the sense of living through something fragile. When a city declares a critical incident, even quietly, everyone feels the shift. Whether they hear the words or not, tonight London moved into that space and stayed there longer than anyone wanted. Fuel on the fire. While the crowds filled London streets, a second storm was building on people's screens. Social media lit up with shaky videos, urgent voice notes, and claims that outpaced any official response. Some footage was real, some was recycled from past years, stripped of context and repackaged to inflame. A video of a fire from a different city, a different time, was shared as if it were burning tonight. An old fight outside a government office was labelled as fresh proof of new violence. Group chats buzzed with warnings. No-go zones forming. Locals under attack. Migrants being hunted. None could be confirmed immediately, but that did not matter. The impact was already felt. Fear moved faster than facts. For some, it meant staying home, afraid of what they might walk into. For others, it meant heading out with even more determination, convinced they were needed to defend their streets or send a message to leaders who no longer listened. Police posted updates. Officials tried to push back against false claims, but trust was already worn thin. People no longer waited for the official version. They believed what felt true, what matched their own lived experience, and what their friends were also seeing and saying But to understand why it took hold so quickly, you have to step back and see the wider pressure building for years. Mass immigration is not just a political talking point for many. It is a daily reality. In waiting rooms, in housing queues, on public transport, they have seen the net migration numbers, not in spreadsheets, but in the hotels filled overnight, in the flats that vanish from rental markets, in the new names on school registers, in the languages spoken at bus stops. In small towns, people have watched their neighbourhoods change almost overnight. Sometimes it is quiet and gradual, other times it is sudden and sharp. A hotel turns into an asylum centre, a doctor's surgery stops taking new patients, a child waits an extra year for a school place. They are told that services are under pressure, but also told not to link that pressure to migration. They are told to be understanding but not heard when they say they are struggling. It is not always about hostility. Often it is about exhaustion. Exhaustion with being told that their questions are illegitimate, their concerns bigoted, and their observations untrue. Housing lists get longer. General practitioner appointments vanish. Emergency departments are full. And yet emergency money is always found for hotel bills, for lawyers, for appeals. To many, the system now looks like this. If you follow the rules, you wait. If you break them, you are fast-tracked into accommodation, support and protection. That belief may not always match policy detail, but it is how things look and feel on the ground. And when pressure builds for years without relief, it only takes a spark, a policy, a court ruling, a rumour to light it. The night London erupted was not born from nothing. It was the release of tension that had been held too long. And online in real time, it spread across the country faster than any police van could move. Not just a protest, not just a riot, but a symptom of a bigger pressure that no one wants to admit is reaching its limit.
This summer saw a number of anti-migrant protests outside hotels housing asylum seekers following the arrest of an Ethiopian migrant who was later convicted of sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl.
Ordinary people caught in the middle. In the middle of all of this are ordinary people who do not fit cleanly into the slogan shouted on either side. Long-standing residents who consider themselves fair-minded and open find themselves worrying about the pace of change and the sustainability of what they are told is inevitable. They do not want to be cruel. They simply want to know whether anyone has thought seriously about how much a system can absorb. Alongside them are migrants who came through legal routes, filled out every form and passed every test. Many of them work in essential roles, from healthcare to transport. They are dismayed to see their presence used as a reason for anger, and they are equally dismayed to watch the system appear to reward people who have ignored the rules they carefully followed. They are caught between gratitude for opportunities and anxiety about the backlash. Then there are the younger faces, some from families rooted in Britain for generations, others from more recent arrivals. For some of them, the night offers a dangerous attraction, a chance to assert themselves in a way they do not usually feel able to. The mix of righteous anger, misdirected blame and pure thrill-seeking is difficult to separate once the crowd is large enough. The result is a complex, messy human picture. There is no simple us versus them line that neatly explains who is on which side of the barrier. There are locals shouting for stricter controls and locals shouting against racism. There are migrants who fear being scapegoated and migrants who are quietly critical of lax enforcement. The only thing they all have in common is that they are living with the consequences of decisions made far above their heads.
I'm just really here for my grandchildren's future. I'm just worried about where this country's going.
We're just standing up for our rights in Britain, and hence we're flying the Union flags and England flags, because we're fed up of being told what to do, how to not to tweet, it's not a free state anymore.
Businesses, streets, and a city that feels different beyond the major clashes. The city's smaller details tell their own story. Shop owners, especially those on the main routes of marches, made decisions they never liked to make. Some closed hours early, losing vital income because they feared damage to their windows or stock. Others kept the doors open but removed displays and moved high-value items to the back, adjusting their layout to the threat. Taxi drivers and delivery riders watched live streams and group chats, deciding which areas to avoid. A few posted their own warnings, telling others which streets were blocked or where bottles were being thrown. Service workers, from bar staff to security guards, had to weigh up whether to commute into late shifts at all. The unseen economic cost of a night like this does not appear on a single invoice, but it is very real. For residents, the transformation was emotional as well as practical. Streets that normally felt familiar and safe took on an edge. Parents told older children to come home earlier than usual. People who would usually walk chose to share lifts, even if it meant waiting. The city's usual loud confidence, the sense that whatever happens, it carries on, dimmed slightly. This is how a place changes, at least for a while. Not only in the scenes that make national headlines, but in the hesitations and altered routines of hundreds of thousands of people. That shift in mood is subtle, but it can last longer than the smoke and the sirens. Emergency meetings and spin. While the streets churned, the government machines turned. In offices near and away from the immediate unrest, senior figures gathered around screens and briefing papers. Police commanders gave updates. Advisors weighed how much to say and how soon. The Prime Minister was briefed on the broad picture. Multiple flashpoints, significant numbers on the streets, some violence, some arrests, and a tense but not yet catastrophic situation. The Home Secretary received more detailed reports, including early indications of who had been detained and for what. Both would later have to speak publicly, but first they had to decide the tone. Some voices argued for a strong line, emphasising law and order, making it clear that violence would not be tolerated. Others warned that an overly combative tone might inflame matters, especially when so many on the streets were not hardened agitators, but frustrated citizens. There was talk of a tiny minority of troublemakers versus legitimate concerns of British values and our proud history of welcoming those in need. Behind those familiar phrases was a quieter admission, sometimes spoken only in private. That admission was simple. This was not a surprise. Warnings had been issued for years about the strain on services, the perception of unfairness, and the political danger of refusing to talk honestly about immigration and capacity. Those warnings had often been filed under sensitive and left for another day. The bill for that delay was now falling due on the streets of the capital. Competing narratives, and by the time dawn approached, the media narratives were already solidifying. Some outlets focused heavily on scenes of confrontation, labelling the unrest as a surge of far-right anger driven by hatred and stoked by online agitators. They highlighted racist chants and banners, where they appeared framing the entire event as a backlash against multiculturalism itself. Other outlets framed the same scenes as a sign of the working class finally snapping, presenting the unrest as an uprising against mass immigration and political betrayal. They gave more airtime to residents complaining about housing, school places, and crime, and less to the small but ugly minority, using the chaos to push openly extremist messages. In between these poles stood commentators trying to insist that more than one thing could be true at once, that bigoted rhetoric could appear alongside legitimate grievance, that both needed to be seen clearly rather than one being used to erase the other. But in a polarised environment, nuance struggles to travel. Audiences gravitate toward the explanation that best fits their existing belief, and the night in London becomes another symbol in an already crowded gallery of confirmation. This divergence matters because it shapes what happens next. If the unrest is framed solely as a problem of extremist thuggery, the response will focus almost entirely on policing. If it is framed solely as a justified revolt, the danger of excusing violence grows. Somewhere there is a more honest picture that acknowledges the darker elements while still taking the underlying pressure seriously. Whether the political class can afford to paint that picture is another question. the rest of the United Kingdom. On Edge London may be the stage, but the audience is spread from coastal towns to former industrial cities. As images of the unrest played on screens across the country, people saw more than just the capital. They saw a preview of what might happen closer to home if tensions continue to grow. In towns where hotels have already been converted to asylum accommodation, residents watched closely. Many recognised the language being used in interviews with Londoners. Talk of feeling ignored, of being stretched to breaking point, of having no say in decisions that transform their streets. For them, the events in the capital were both distant and uncomfortably familiar. Local councillors and police chiefs did their own quiet calculations. They reviewed existing plans for demonstrations, assessed how many officers could be deployed at short notice, and checked the state of communication channels with community leaders. Officially, everything remained calm. Unofficially, there was a recognition that the margin for error was shrinking. In this way, a night of unrest in London places the whole country on a kind of informal alert. Not necessarily in the sense of soldiers on the streets or emergency laws, but in the sense of political and social nerves. Everyone feels that something important has been revealed, even if they argue about what exactly that something is. Morning after questions. When the night finally thinned into early morning, the counting began. Police forces tallied arrests, injuries and damage. Journalists compiled lists of incidents from minor scuffles to more serious clashes. City workers began the slow process of cleaning up, sweeping glass, repainting walls and reopening roads. But alongside those visible tasks, a more complex reckoning took place. People asked themselves what, if anything, would change as a result of what they had just witnessed. Would there be a serious review of immigration policy, not just at the level of slogans, but at the level of numbers, capacity and enforcement? Would there be a frank admission that the current model was not sustainable? Or would the official response focus narrowly on condemning violence and promising extra funding for policing? On an individual level, minds shifted. Some people who had previously been unsure about the issue found themselves more firmly against current levels of immigration, seeing the unrest as proof that the system was under intolerable strain. Others, disgusted by some of the uglier scenes, doubled down on defending migrants and attacked what they saw as a culture of scapegoating. A smaller number were simply exhausted, feeling that nothing they said or did would make a difference. The morning after held no simple answers. What it held was a clearer view of the cost of avoiding difficult conversations. The unrest had not created the problems, it had exposed them. Whether that exposure would lead to honest change or to further denial remained an open question. Who comes first? When capacity runs out? Underlying all of this is a question that governments have long tried to avoid stating openly. When capacity runs out, who comes first? When there are not enough homes, appointments, school places or police officers to match demand, whose needs are prioritised and on what basis? For years, political leaders have preferred to speak in the language of values rather than limits. They talk about compassion, openness and international duty, and those are real and important concepts. But they are only part of the picture. Without a parallel discussion of capacity, enforcement and trade-offs, they can sound detached from ordinary life. This is not about denying help to those in genuine need. It is about being honest that every decision to extend help beyond the borders has consequences for those within them. When residents see those consequences clearly in their daily lives and feel that they were never asked, never informed and never listened to, resentment grows. When that resentment is dismissed as ignorance or hatred, it does not disappear. It hardens. Nights like the one London has just lived through are symptoms of that hardening. They are not the only symptom, and they are not the whole story, but they are vivid. They force the question that was previously left unsaid into the open. Governments can continue to dodge it, or they can attempt to answer it honestly. Either choice carries risks. Pretending the question does not exist carries the greatest risk of all. But nights like this do not vanish. They sit in people's heads. They become the clip everyone points to in the next argument about borders. and control. More than anything, they are a warning that pressure ignored does not fade. It detonates. So what do you think this really shows? Was this incompetence, cowardice, or something deeper about how our leaders see mass immigration? Drop your view in the comments. I read them, and so do other people trying to make sense of this. If you think this debate should not be buried by tomorrow's headlines, hit like so it reaches more people. And subscribe if you want straight, unsanitized breakdowns the moment stories like this break again.